Wonderful. All right. Can you all hear me clearly? Just give me a thumbs up.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, because I'm using my headphones because I share the house with my daughter, and she, I think, is still sleeping actually, which is bananas, but you know, college. So that's good for her. All right, I'm going to go ahead and mute everybody. Actually, yes, I am a co-host. I can do that. Okay, so I'm muting you all, but you have the opportunity to unmute yourself. So if you want to interrupt me with a question, please feel free to do so, because you are, in my world here, you're on two screens. So I won't necessarily be able to see you if you put your hand up. So if you want to stop me and say, hey, Chazan, whatever, just unmute yourself and throw yourself in. Okay, so to remind you of what this class is, the title of the class is Difficult Text in the Tanakh, How We Face and Frame the Texts that make us squirm. Specifically, I'm guiding us through a series of texts in the Tanakh that deal with how daughters are treated, okay, how daughters fare, not how they're treated, but like how the text treats them, okay? All told, we are going to look at these daughters, okay? We looked at the daughters of Lot last week. We're going to look at Rachel and Leah, Dinah, the first Tamar, who is the daughter-in-law of Judah, the daughter of Yiftach, who has no name, Michal, who is Saul's daughter, Tamar, who is David's daughter, that's the second Tamar that we're going to look at, and Ruth. One of the challenges that I have for you, an invitation, it's not a challenge, but an invitation. If you can think of other daughters in the text, if you could share them with me, if you're thinking about, well, I would really like to look at this daughter or that daughter, let me know who else you're thinking about, and I will make sure to include them at the end if I can, or in the middle. I will share the reason that I'm not sharing the daughters of Zelophehad, okay? You might automatically, I see Sheila nodding her head. You might automatically say, wait a minute, if this is a class on daughters in the Tanakh, why wouldn't you include the daughters of Zelophehad, who are actually titled Banot Zelophehad? They're actually referred to as daughters. And the reason is this. When we meet them, their father is already dead. They don't function so much as daughters as they function already as independent women. Okay? And that's why I don't include them. They don't really fit into the schema that I'm looking at. Another daughter that is missing markedly is Bat Paro, the daughter of Pharaoh. And perhaps I should include her. And I'll tell you off the bat, the reason that I didn't is that I don't think that her text makes us squirm so much, but she'd be interesting to include as a counterpoint because she is a woman of remarkable strength. Okay, remarkable strength. I will tell you another woman I don't include is Miriam. And Miriam is daughter, right? Her parents are alive during a lot of the texts that she's active. The death of her parents is not actually even recorded in the text, so she is a daughter. But my argument is that Miriam is primarily defined in her role as a sister and not in her role as a daughter. In her role as a daughter, you find some really interesting midrashim, right? And Lot's daughters we did last week. So we absolutely did. We did talk about them. So, and I know you were here, Jill. Okay, so today we're going to dive right in, and I'm going to share again the source sheet. Here's your source sheet, but I'm going to share my screen. But you can copy and paste this source sheet into a Word document for yourself so that you can refer back to it if you want, or you can email it to yourself so that you can refer back to it if you like. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. Oh, before I do that, hold on, I'm sorry. Before I share my screen, can you do me a favor and just send me a quick chat that just says yes if you would like me to call on you to read out loud. All you have to do is put into your chat box, yes, okay? If you do not want me to call on you, just don't put anything, okay? But if you would like to read out loud, if you're willing to read out loud, just throw in yes. And it can be to everyone. It doesn't have to be just to me. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and share. And we're going to start by looking at Leah and Rachel. Don't worry, I'm not going to make you read this in Hebrew. Okay. Now, if you remember the way that I do things, I'll interrupt you constantly while you're reading. So, all right. So Myrna got me first. So Myrna, will you start us off, please, with Genesis 29:16? You have to unmute yourself first.
Thank you. Now, Laban had two daughters. The name of the older one was Leah, and the name of the younger one was Rachel. Leah had weak eyes. Rachel was shapely and beautiful. Jacob loved Rachel, so he answered, I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter, Rachel.
Okay,
Laban
pause
said,
here for half a second. Pause here for half a second. One of the ways that the rabbis look at text and want us to look at text, they say a way to interpret text is by something called smichut parshiot, which means look at what's right next to each other, right? So we have Leah had weak eyes, Rachel was shapely and beautiful. So later on, we're going to look at some of the what some of the rabbis, early rabbis, understand by the smichut parshiot of Leah had weak eyes, Rachel was shapely and beautiful. But what I want us to look at for a second is Leah had weak eyes, Rachel was shapely and beautiful, Jacob loved Rachel. What does the text seem to tell us here? What does the text seem to connect? A pshat read, a simple read, and on the face of it read, seems to connect that Jacob's love of Rachel is connected to her beauty. Okay? And that in our time is offensive. It's not offensive. It's kind of offensive, right? We don't want to be loved just for our looks.
It's shallow.
Girls don't, shallow, thank you. Shallow, exactly, right? We would hope that a lasting love is based on far more than looks, okay? So remember, because the rabbis are going to come to this also a little bit. They're not going to refer specifically to the looks aspect of the love, but they are going to look at why Jacob automatically goes to Rachel, okay? All right, continue please, Myrna. Laban said,
better that I give her to you than that I should give her to an outsider. Stay with me. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of his love for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife, for my time is fulfilled, that I may cohabitate with her. And
okay,
Laban gathered.
Half a second. I just want us to realize the text tells us that it feels like a few days to Jacob, and for us it just skips those 7 years entirely. So it does the same thing to us, right? It's moving right along. Okay, great. So by the way, in reading the Midrashim, I learned that, and this is something I hadn't thought about before, by the time that Jacob says to Lavan, give me this woman for my wife, he's in his 80s.
But also, isn't it another part that I've learned that it didn't seem like just a blink of an eye, that it was hard and long and everything?
So what I learned, yes. So it's interesting because what the rabbi said about this, and I didn't include this in the source sheet, but I did read this. What the rabbi said is that while he was doing the labor, it dragged on and on and on, and it felt like forever to him. But when he was alone with Rachel, the time seemed to fly. So that for him, both were happening, right? So because he does, and what's the reason that the rabbis tell us this is that on the one hand, he complains to Lot about this long period of time that he spends, but on the other hand, the text specifically says the time seemed to him like days, right? So it's contrasting the time that he spends doing the manual labor, doing the work, with the time that he is able to spend with Rachel, with his beloved. Thank you, Anne, for pointing that out. Very, very good point. Okay, going back to sharing the screen. And we are now, I'll help you in a second, to verse 21. Right here.
Then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife, for my time is fulfilled that I may cohabitate with her. And Laban gathered all the people of the place and made a feast. When evening came, he took his daughter Leah and brought her to him, and he cohabited with her.
Okay, pause there. So I want to share that everyone at the feast, other than Jacob, knew what was going on. And this is stunning, right? Everyone knew what was going on. Rachel knew it. Leah knew it. All of the people there knew it. And there's a midrash that says that during the entire feast, as Jacob was getting more and more drunk, the people of the town were going, Leah, which means it's Leah, right? But they're going, Leah, which sounds almost like a kind of thing, right? And so there's this midrash that Jacob was surrounded by all of these people going, Leah. And the day after, when he wakes up and the light streams into the tent and he sees, and he's no longer drunk, right? And he sees that he has married himself to Leah. He storms out and he says to the people, now I understand what you were saying. Like, I thought it was just some weird custom of yours, but you were actually saying to me, it's Leah. It's so much pathos. It's bonkers what's going on with these girls, right? And I can't wait to get into the midrash with you. Okay, let's finish it up. Myrna, if you wanna, when evening came. Oh, am I sharing again? I'm not sharing, sorry. I went back to it, you didn't see it too? Okay, here you go, when evening came.
When evening came, he took his daughter Leah and brought her to him, and he cohabited with her. Laban had given his maidservant Zilpah to his daughter Leah as her maid. When morning came, there was Leah. So he said to Laban, what is this that you have done to me? I was in your service for Rachel. Why did you deceive me? And Laban said, it is not the practice of our place to marry off the younger before the older. Wait until the bridal week of this one is over, and we will give you that one too, provided that you serve me for another 7 years.
Okay, pause for half a second. So, thank you, sorry. All right, I'm gonna move this up so we know exactly where we are and stop the share. All right, so putting yourself in anybody's shoes, I'm gonna invite you to put yourself in Rachel's shoes, in Leah's shoes, in Laban's shoes, in Jacob's shoes. How are you feeling? What's going on here? Right? Do you have any feelings? I want you to get into the text and feel anything.
Well, Leah must have felt that she had to do what her father told her, because she was a dutiful daughter, and that's what Dad said, and she had to step back. And of course, so Leah must have been thrilled.
Leah must have been thrilled. Thrilled why? Because?
Well, she finally got a husband. She's not a beautiful girl, and she probably didn't have too many offers.
Perhaps she's not a beautiful girl, and therefore she didn't have too many offers. Perhaps. Okay, good. She might have been thrilled. Bev, I see you wanting to talk. Go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
I was going to say that possibly that Leah had been jealous of Rachel. Rachel was a beautiful woman. She had Jacob lusting after her, and she won because she was the one who was married to Jacob rather than Rachel.
Interesting.
So she could
Interesting.
hold that over her.
Okay. Great. Great. Anybody else want to share?
This is Sheila. I just personally feel angry. I've always
Good.
felt angry around this.
Why?
The deception that Lavan would do that.
The deception on Jacob?
Yeah. That he was deceived.
It's a terrible thing that Laban did to Jacob. It really is. I mean, like, it's at the very most basic level, it is absolutely disgusting, right? It is a terrible betrayal of trust. And remember that Lavan and Jacob are already their uncle and nephew, right? So it's not like Jacob is some unknown quantity in Lavan's life. He has just cheated his nephew, right? Terribly. And now he says, okay, you did work for 7 years for the younger one. So in 1 week, you stay this week with the older one, and then in 1 week, I'm going to give you the younger one. Okay. So let's go ahead and we'll finish.
I've got a question.
Yeah, please.
I've got a question. Like Sheila, I felt outrage and outrage for all the characters involved. But to go back to something you said last week, in terms of try and imagine yourself and try and have the mentality of this time period.
Good.
So I guess my question is, I'll put my cup under that as well. So in this time period, is that something that was considered acceptable? Because if it wasn't acceptable, why didn't everyone feel the outrage that Sheila feels, that I feel, that probably everyone on the screen feels?
Right. So I think that might be what fueled the midrash of all the people screaming at Jacob, Hileah, Hileah. That the rabbis are saying, this is not okay. This is not okay, what Laban did. And in fact, the rabbis do not have a positive view of Lavan. They don't, right? And what's going to happen later in the text is that God is going to say, we're going to see in the text, God sees that Leah is unloved, and so God opens her womb, right? One of the things, I don't remember if I shared this with you last week or if I've ever shared this with you, but one of the concepts that I have come to recognize just in the last few years, and this was not something that was taught to me ever, I don't know if it's written down anywhere, but I think it's worthy of a paper. It's worthy of a study and an essay. I think that the Torah paints, and it makes so much sense to me, but it's not the way we think of things. I think that the Torah paints the idea that the natural state of a woman is barrenness, that the natural state of a womb is closed, right? It's closed. And the only way for a woman to get pregnant is for God to recognize her and open her womb and make her fertile. That fertility is 100% a blessing from God. It's not like, I mean, in my childhood and in my adolescence, I'll say, we were warned, you can get pregnant at any moment. You must protect yourself at all times against becoming pregnant. And I think that's whether we get that kind of asked as a result of, I'm watching all these shows about 1700s and 1800s British whatever, like The Crown and not The Crown, Downton Abbey and Bridgerton and whatever, and like girls don't know how anything works, right? And Spring Awakening, we didn't know how pregnancy happened, right? So this idea, they did know in the Bible, by the way, how pregnancy happens. They absolutely knew. but the idea was not that any time you have intimacy, there is a good chance you'll get pregnant. That it was actually the opposite. That in fact, the only way for pregnancy to happen is for God to remember you. So the fact that Leah bears children first tells us that God, God notices her, God sees her plight, right? And I think it helps us to understand that Lavan is terrible, and she's treated badly, right? That I think that the text supports that she is worthy of our, I don't want to say pity, what's the word I'm looking for? Compassion. And maybe even pity. Yes, Bev.
I was going to say, does any of this come from the fact that in pagan religions there seemed to always be a god of fertility? Can we
yeah. No,
some
the
of the
fact that
basics of
the fact that God has a deep relationship to fertility and to family, to progeny, I think that's absolutely an answer to the pagan fertility. Like God has to be involved in that, right? God has to be involved in that. I absolutely think so. And did you want to make a comment on that?
Yeah, I'm struggling with all the studying I've been doing since March. That and so it's now one of my theologies that without this, we wouldn't have had all of Leah's sons, and therefore, how do we move forward? And so, as part of my theology, that I just have to, I can discuss all I want, I can be outraged all I want, I cannot like it all I want, but at the end of the day, there's a master plan. And then do I just have to reside to the master plan? And I can argue and I can make points and I can be correct, but it doesn't really change anything because there's always a master plan.
Good way to think.
Yes, and I would say yes, and remember that last week one of the ideas that I pushed is that when women use intimacy, when women use sex in order to further, like for good, basically, in order to bear children, which is good, okay, in order to continue the line, that's rewarded, right? So I think one way, and you might be able to find some peace, is to say, basically, Rachel and Leah are going to engage in a Cold War, right? The same way that we're like building up weapons, right? Going back to the 70s and the 80s, right? And we have this Cold War and escalation. That was towards evil, right? But what's going to happen between these two sisters is that there's going to be a Cold War where they're building, but the idea is to have children. The idea is to build up the people, right? And so perhaps it can be, we can have a Machiavellian kind of look and say, all right, the strife between them was bad, but the outcome was positive, right? And the truth is, it takes a long time before the outcome is positive. Just the having of the children, like that did not bring peace in the camp of Jacob, right? And we know this because what happens between those brothers when Joseph goes out to check on them for their dad, right? They throw him in a pit. He ends up being stolen from the pit. They were going to sell him. They were going to kill him. Then they were going to sell him. Then they just lose him. He gets kidnapped, okay? So the strife between the sisters, and my argument today is that the strife between the sisters is the fault of the father originally. It becomes, I think, the fault of the husband, right? I think Jacob kind of perpetuates the rivalry between the sisters. But these two women are treated trickily, right? They're not, it's not like, I mean, it wasn't as bad as what Lot did to his daughters, right? Lot offered his daughters up to be raped by the crowds, right? And all Laban did, Laban could argue, right? He does. He says, look, in this place, we don't marry off the younger before we marry off the older. That's not what we do. I'm looking out for my daughters, right? But he puts his daughters into a situation where they're going to be battling each other forever. I want to share with you a few, and I'm gonna push this a little fast actually, because I want to look at Dina, and we don't have time. We don't have enough time to do all of this. But at any rate, I want to go back to the Leah's eyes piece of things, right? The text says Leah's eyes were soft. So Dad Fakanim, which is an early commentator, says Leah's eyes were soft, so that due to her beautiful eyes, she appeared beautiful all over. So here we have the expression rach next to good, right? So they're talking about, they say this commentator is saying Leah's eyes being soft is not that she had weak eyes, but rather that she had soft eyes, and that her soft eyes made her whole everything look good. But then he says, in contrast to Rachel, whose body was beautiful, but whose eyes detracted because she cried all the time, right? Because she was worried, according to this guy, Rachel was worried that she was going to be married off to Esau because Jacob would divorce her for her barrenness, okay? Now, this really only makes sense in light of an earlier midrash, and that earlier midrash, okay, is this. Leah thought that she was going to be married off to Esau because everyone said, Rebecca has 2 sons, Laban has 2 daughters. So the elder daughter will go to the elder son, and the younger daughter will go to the younger son. But the problem is, and so Leah cried and cried and cried, and so her eyes were called. This is Rashi, by the way. Rashi says Leah's eyes were tender because she cried all the time because she thought she was going to be married off to Esau. But then this later midrash comes in and says, no, Rachel started crying all the time when Jacob shows up. Because once Jacob shows up, she realizes her father is going to marry the older Leah off, and then Rachel will be left to marry Esau. Okay, so these girls are in a panicked state, according to Rashi and later commentators, because they don't want to be married off to Esau, because they know about Esau. They know that he's a man of the field and that he's a rough man, and they're afraid, right? They're afraid to be married off to him. They don't see him as, well, according to the Meforshim, according to our commentators, he's not a Torah scholar, so they don't want to be with him, okay? But they argue a lot of them argue. Radak says, Rachel was of beautiful form and fair to look on without any blemish. And form refers to the shape of the face and the rest of the body and the posture and her skin color, and her hair was dark, whereas Leah only has beautiful eyes. Okay. Finally, I want to share with you a midrash, and this will share screen. Hold on a second. Okay, hold on one second. Let me just see who wants to. Bernice, are you up to reading? All right, go ahead and unmute yourself. All right, and we're gonna look. Okay, so they're talking about the Holy One blessing that he immediately hears the prayer a man whispers in his heart, right? Leah would sit at the crossroads inquiring about Esau's actions because she knew that she was already predestined to marry him. And they would tell her, oh, he's a wicked man. Can you start right here? He sheds, oh, he is a wicked man.
Oh, he is a wicked man. He sheds blood and waylays passers-by. He is covered with red hair as a garment and commits every kind of abomination against God. Upon hearing all of this, she would cry bitterly. My sister Rachel and I were born of the same womb, yet Rachel is to marry the righteous man, and I the wicked Esau. She wept and fasted until her sight became weak. Hence it is written, and Leah's eyes were weak. Genesis 29:17. And the Lord saw that Leah was hated. This verse indicates that Esau's actions were hateful to her. However, when Rachel learned that she was to marry Jacob, she was elated and became arrogant. Once they both were married to Jacob, the Holy One, blessed be he said, she cried and fasted and despised Esau's behavior and prayed to me, it would be unjust to keep her from the righteous one. Indeed, I will let her bear sons first. Thus said, and the Lord saw that Leah was hated.
Okay, so I bring this midrash because it does something very interesting. What it does, oh, I'm sorry I didn't make it bigger, Susan. Okay, what it does is it kind of takes the blame off of Laban for marrying them both to Jacob. But what I want to close up with is saying that the Torah itself recognizes that this was a terrible thing. Because what is the mitzvah? What is the commandment that we get about a man marrying two sisters? We're not allowed to do it. Okay? The fact that the Torah comes in at any point and says, do not marry sisters, must be a reaction to the marriage of these two sisters to one man. Because the fact of the matter is, neither of them ever knows peace. Neither of them ever knows any peace. Once Leah starts having children, she is still not satisfied because her husband doesn't prefer her. And Rachel spends her entire life her married life, trying to catch up with her sister, and she dies unfulfilled. Okay. I could go deeper into this text, but I want to share with you now. I want to transition to Dinah. Now, the story of Dinah, it is the most incredible tragedy. It is just 100% tragic. Let's jump right in, and let's see. Bernice, do you want to read a little bit more? And if anybody else wants to read, go ahead and shoot me a text. Let's learn about Dinah.
Now Dinah, the daughter whom Leah had borne to Jacob, went out to visit the daughters of the land. Shechem, son of Hamor, the Hivite, chief of the country, saw her and took her and lay with her by force. Being strongly drawn to Dinah, daughter of Jacob, and in love with the maiden, he spoke to the maiden tenderly. So Shechem said to his father Hamor, give me this girl as a wife. Jacob heard that he had defiled his daughter Dinah, but since his sons were in the field with his cattle, Jacob kept silent until they came home. Then Shechem's father Hamor came out to Jacob to speak to him. Meanwhile, Jacob's sons, having heard the news, came in from the field. The men were distressed and very angry because he had committed an outrage in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, a thing not to be done.
Okay. So, in a nutshell, before I ever studied beyond the Torah, right, into Nevi'im and Ketuvim, I thought this was the worst story of all, right? Turns out it's not, unfortunately, which is just horrific in and of itself. Okay, so what is difficult about this story? What are some of the problems here, right? What bothers you? Before I tell you what bothers me. Is there anything in particular? Are you bothered? Does anything here bother you?
Well,
Yeah, did Dinah
none
got
of them care.
Hold on, Shira?
that Dina got hurt. She was
That
raped.
Dina got hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah, that Dina got hurt at all. Like, Dina is raped, right? That's what happened. I mean, like, she should be protected by her father. What do we do about that? What does the text do about that? What do the rabbis do about that, right? The rabbis are very interesting. I have yet to find any text that says that Jacob could have protected her, right? And in fact, I've seen two different types of midrashim. One kind of puts the blame on Shechem, okay? Shechem, there's a midrash. I don't remember if I've shared, if it's in the, oh, wait, I didn't share the sheet with you. Let me go ahead and share the sheet with you. I'm going to put it in the chat window so that you have it. According to one midrash, Shechem has seen Dina before. Like, he was hanging out near Jacob's area and he's seen her and he knows about her. And so what he does, let me see if I've included this so that you can see it. So what he does is, no, I don't think so. I didn't include it. Okay, good. So I'm glad I'm telling you about it. So what he does is he sends the girls of the town out to, like, right next to Jacob's living area. And he says to the girls, make a little presentation, like make a little fair, sing and dance outside, like, 100 feet away, 500 feet away, so that they can see from within their area, they can see you singing and dancing. And then, Dina is the only girl, right? According to this midrash, Dina is the only girl in the family other than her mother's, which is highly unlikely, but at any rate, whatever. It's likely that she's the oldest girl, right? And she doesn't have female age mates. So when she sees these women singing and dancing, her curiosity is piqued and she goes out, she follows them, right? Now, another midrash, so that would put the blame kind of on Shechem as a tempter, right? That he's interested in her and he has to draw her out. So he draws her out in this way. Now, I also read a midrash, which was so upsetting to me, that said that how did Leah get so lucky, right, as to be married off to Jacob? This one midrash says that Leah herself, and I don't know what his understanding is, why he says this, that Leah used to put on all of her jewelry and all of her finest clothing, and they say because she did this, she was a prostitute. And so too, Dina put on all of her jewelry and all of her finery and went out to the daughters of the town, right? And went out to be with them. And that she catches the eye of Shechem, according to this midrash. And this midrash goes on to say, and that's why we say, like mother, like daughter.
But
And I have to tell you,
but if she
please.
was with all these other women, and I'm horrified that she was raped, don't get me wrong, why weren't the other women, if I were a man, protecting her? They knew she was younger.
Oh, we don't know how old
They knew
she
she
is.
was inexperienced. Where was the protection from the other women?
That's a great question. Perhaps Shechem had already had all of them.
That's not the point. She went out with women. Where is the protection from the other women?
I love this question, Anne.
And I'm not hearing any midrash about this piece of it.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Do
And you know what?
we not take responsibility for others? Are we dumb?
That is such a great
guys.
question. And I love this. I would say
that's where I'm outraged. I'm not outraged that raped. I'm outraged. Where's the protection?
Perhaps. And I don't want to offer a quick answer to this question, Anne, because I think that we need to dwell in the place. I think we need to dwell in the discomfort of the question, right? And the outrage of the question. I think worth considering is the possibility that the men who are writing these midrashim do not take for a moment even the possibility that women could protect each other. right? It doesn't help. It doesn't help. I'm just, wait, and you're muted.
Sorry. In other parts of the Torah, women do help each other or argue with each other. I mean, I understand it's a male-driven that world. That's not where I'm outraged. I'm outraged that there aren't stories where women are protecting women.
Excuse me,
Great.
Tal,
Please, Stephen, go ahead.
could it be jealousy in that Dina was all dressed up and they were not?
Perhaps, although I think that the Midrash would say that she got all dressed up like to be like them. You know, that perhaps they were prostitutes and she dressed up like a prostitute to be with the prostitutes.
But she was the other. They were of one group and she was from another group and she came into their territory.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. All right, so let's look. Absolutely. Let's look at what happens. Let's look and see. Hold on a second. Okay. All right. Okay. Who's my next reader? Bev, you didn't get a chance to read yet, and you said you would like to. So, Bev, let's look at some of these midrashim. Take a look at this first one. This is Rashi.
The daughter of Leah. No, scripture calls her.
So scripture calls her, right?
So I'm sorry. So scripture calls her, why not the daughter of Jacob? But just because she went out, she is called Leah's daughter, since she too was fond of going out. As it is said, and Leah went out to meet him. With an allusion to her, they formulated the proverb, like mother, like daughter.
So here, Rashi is very interesting. Rashi is struggling with the question of why is she called Bat Leah instead of Bat Yaakov, right? No one is referred to, very rarely do you get referred to as the daughter of your mother. Normally you're referred to as the daughter of your father, right? Here she's referred to the daughter of her mother, and why is that? And Rashi comes to tell us, because according to the Midrash, right, she has something in common with her mother, and that's that both of them went out, okay? And that's important. This is a textual, this is a way to learn about a thing by seeing what the text does the same between the two of them. So Rashi is not making a judgment here. Rashi is simply saying, Yavo, like they both do this going out thing, and that must be why the text is doing this. And then he brings in this midrash to say, and also, by the way, that's why the midrash says like mother, like daughter. Rashi does not bring in the prostitute business, right? But he assumes that by bringing in Genesis Rabbah 81, that's where they talk about it, that you're going to go and look it up and you're going to see that too. Okay, so that's what Rashi brings in. So in a way, Rashi is saying it's okay that she's treated the way she's treated because she's acting the part of a harlot. And what happens to harlots? Right? Bad happens to harlots.
That's so wrong
Okay.
on so many levels.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm not necessarily going to make this better. Right? We're gonna struggle with it. Bev, will you read the next one? Ha'emek Davar.
Dinah went out. Since Yaakov lived outside of town, the verse should have said she came in. However, scripture wanted to hint that she went out of the guidelines of proper behavior by going to watch the locals dance and make merry.
Okay. What problem is the Midrash trying to solve here? The Midrashist says, the text should have said she went into town, but instead it says she went out to the women of the town. And when the Midrash, when the text uses the word she went out, what it's actually alluding to is that she went out of the bounds of appropriate behavior for a young woman, for a daughter of Yaakov. What problem the Midrash is struggling here with is the problem that we are struggling with, which is, why does a bad thing happen to her at all? And this Midrash says it's her fault. This Midrash is victim blaming. And I bring this because it is so awful. It is so hard for us, right? Because it sucks. And it is within our sacred text. It is part of our written legacy, because this is how she was seen by generations, okay? Not as a young girl, well, no, I shouldn't say not as, also as, right? There is Midrash that paints her as a curious young girl who gets dressed up like the girls that she sees and goes out to investigate, right? But there are also Midrashim that say, no, like mother, like daughter, nope, she was outside of the bounds. And when you're outside of the bounds, you're not protected by your family, and bad things will happen. Right, Steve?
No blaming by the brothers. Absolutely no blame put on her for being raped. No blame at all. So why is this accepted?
Good. Her
and why are they
brothers-
outraged?
Great. Her brothers don't blame her. Her brothers are outraged. Her brothers rescue her. Okay?
So
and I
isn't
think
it a
that's-
big leap to say the kinds of things that the rabbi says here?
So then why? Yes, I think it is. I think that there's an argument that what the rabbis are saying is not, doesn't jive with the text. Okay? I think you're right. So why do you think they said it? Think
Fitting
about
it to the times?
think about their context, right? The context in which those rabbis who are writing are living. We are not in charge of ourselves, right? They are post-Talmudic. They're writing in Jerusalem or not in Jerusalem. They're writing in towns that are not sovereign Jewish towns, okay? Whether they could be in Jerusalem actually, but they're little pockets in Israel. There are pockets of Jews in Babylonia, and we are not, and we live in Shtetlach, right? It's obviously it's not Eastern Europe, but we're living in our tiny little communities, and it's dangerous for us to go outside of our tiny little communities. And so in the time that they're writing, and their writings, by the way, you have to think about this for a second. Their writings that we're reading, they're originally sermons. This is originally, I don't know about Rashi, okay? But it could be with Rashi also. They have congregations of people who come and listen to them, and their students on Shabbat, and their students write down what they taught, okay? So these are teachings. They're not just writing for fun, okay? These are teachings that they're teaching to their people. And why? Because if God forbid their daughters were to go out, like, what is it? Who is it? Hotel, right? Doesn't Hotel go out and she ends up with Perchik, right? And how lucky is she? This is a Fiddler on the Roof. How lucky is she that Perchik actually has respect for her and marries her? But that's the best case scenario, and it's a pretty bad case scenario, by the way, from Tavia's point of view.
Do you have any commentaries from modern day women commentators?
Fantastic question. I want to
Nahama Leibowitz, what does she say?
Right. Nahama, so I don't have Nahama on this today for you. I can get Nechama for you, all right? I do want to, and it wouldn't be, Nechama doesn't always bring in her own commentary. Nechama brings in all of this other commentary. Like, that's one of the things that Nechama's really, really known for. I didn't find on a quick review any of Nechama's commentary on this that wasn't quoting other people. Okay. That said, Aviva Zornberg is someone that I can, should, you can, should, we can, should look towards. The one thing that I want to highlight before we start closing up for today is a commentary on Jacob's silence, because what really upset me was the role of the father, right? He doesn't stop her from going out in the first place. I don't have a big problem with that, because Jacob has a mess of children, a mess of wives, a ton of cattle. He's very busy. He's got a lot on his plate, and his daughter sneaks out. It happens, right? It happens. How many of you, when you were teenagers, had friends who snuck out at night? Okay. I know I never snuck out at night. I definitely stayed out too late once, but my brother lived in his bedroom, had a sliding glass door. He recently said to me, like, what kind of idiots were our parents that they allowed me to have a bedroom with a sliding glass door? He's like, he would leave the house all the time just because he could, right? But at any rate, but what happens is that Jacob has an opportunity to say something when Shechem and Hamor come to him, and he says nothing, right? Or Chaim says Jacob sent a message to his brothers, asking them to return home. Sforno comes in and says Jacob refrains from starting a quarrel until his sons would have been informed of what happened, so they could be on guard against their adversaries. The idea is that if Jacob had begun to pick a fight, right, if he had reacted in a fatherly way before his sons got home, there could be repercussions. There could be a fight immediately, and his sons wouldn't even know what was going on, right? So that he stays quiet, just not because he's not pissed, but because he wants the whole family to be able to react together. And I have to say, I'm grateful for that reaction of the rabbis, because Jacob's silence has always been a gut punch for me. Just really terrible. I want to finish us up. So Bev, if you'll do one more reading, I want to finish us up with going back to the text. Okay. Bev, will you please read on the third day?
On the third day, when they were in pain, Simeon and Levi, two of Jacob's sons, brothers of Dinah, took each his sword, came upon the city unmolested, and slew all the males.
Okay, half a second. Remember that the brothers and Jacob agreed that in order for Dinah to marry Shechem, all of the men of the town had to circumcise themselves. Okay, so keep going. They put Hamor.
They put Hamor and his son Shechem to the sword, took Dinah out of Shechem's house, and went away. The other sons of Jacob came upon the slain and plundered the town, because their sister had been defiled. They seized their flocks and herds and asses and all that was inside the town and outside, all their wealth, all that was in the houses. They took as captives and booty. Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have brought trouble on me, making me odious among the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. My men are few in number, So if they unite against me and attack me, I and my house will be destroyed. But they answered, should our sister be treated like a whore?
Okay, thank you. So in finishing with this, what I want us to recognize is that Dinah has two roles. One is daughter and the other is sister. Okay. And what the text does here, and I'll bring in the Rashi actually, that Shimon and Levi are referred to as Achei Dinah, Dinah's brothers, right? And Rashi says, because they risked their lives for her, they are designated as her brothers. Okay. Oh, and one other thing, Ora Chaim brings in a very interesting point, because you might look at the behavior of the brothers and say, holy moly, like rape is not punishable by death, right? So the brothers are murderers. And Ora Chaim says, no, I don't want you to think that they're murderers. They said the reason that they killed all the males in the city is that they were accessories to the crime of keeping Dinah captive after the rape, which is tantamount to kidnapping. And according to the Noahide law, the penalty for kidnapping is death, okay? So you need to understand that the Torah doesn't see the behavior of Shimon and Levi as against the law, right? Jacob doesn't say to them, you broke the Torah, like you broke with the commandment of not committing murder, right? Jacob understands that what they did is actually reasonable. They were carrying out the judgment according to the Noahide law. Okay? What does Jacob do? Jacob says, your behavior is going to get me in trouble. And so it's kind of, you know, I go back and forth here, like maybe Jacob is doing the right thing, maybe he's not, maybe he's doing the right thing, maybe he's not. But this last sentence makes it so clear to me that the text actually sees the brothers as the ones who are doing the right thing and the father as the one who has done the wrong thing. That, and in terms of looking at Dinah to see how her daughter's treated versus how her sister's treated, that sisters are protected. Sisters have power. Daughters are, excuse me, please, daughters are screwed, right? Daughters are in trouble. Daughters are vulnerable. And daughters very often are sacrificed.
But aren't daughters also sisters?
If they're lucky. Not all daughters are sisters. The daughters of Lot have no brothers anymore. Their brothers are married off.
But they have each other.
Yes, and they support each other. But not every daughter is a sister. And what Rashi comes to say, that Rashi comes to tell us that the fact that these boys are called Achei Dinah, like they're all Dinah's brothers. Dinah has more brothers just from Leah than Shimon and Levi, right? So Rashi says, how come these brothers, Shimon and Levi, are called Achei Dinah? And Rashi says, because to be an ach, that's a position of power and chivalry and protection and strength. Rashi is saying that ach is an honorary title. Is it not an honorary title, a title of honor? It's a position of strength and a title of honor to be a brother, right? Think about the way we use it. Brothers in arms, right? When a guy joins a fraternity, they are his brothers. Clearly, they are not his brothers, but it is a term of high honor. And when a man in the military, right, or a woman in the military looks to the people with whom they serve, they are brothers and sisters. How did that come about? Because there's this concept that brothers and also sisters, and to your point, that we protect each other, that we support each other, that we don't leave each other behind. It is better to be a brother or a sister than it is to be a daughter. And with that, I will link my source sheet again so that you have it. And I actually have to run in a minute because I have another class, a class where I'm a student. So there it is again. Does anybody have any last closing up questions or comments that you'd like to share?
Better to be a brother than a passive Jacob.
Please God, much better to be a brother than a passive Jacob ever. Thank you. Suzanne, and then I saw Bev's hand also.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. The story I think of Dina is told in many other cultures, like Little Red Riding Hood. Don't go out alone. Stay with the unit. And that was very true in Native American culture. A girl who was out with nobody else and no protector was liable to be raped. She was somebody else's property already, you know. So
Absolutely.
even though she was kind of a foolish girl probably and wanted to make herself friendly with the town folk, she did leave the bounds of safety.
Right.
And so,
Right.
you know, and as a child, I think she would have held responsible. Well, you went out.
Right.
So this is what happens.
Absolutely right.
The big bad wolf got you.
Yeah. Oh, and I'll tell you that my own dad, when I brought this up when I was a teenager and I read this story and I said to my father, I have trouble with this. My father, who was brought up in an Orthodox yeshiva, without missing a beat, said she should never have gone out. And that was it. He left it at that. She should never have gone out. And that was his whole upshot. Like, he didn't need to talk about Jacob, about the brothers, about it. She should never have gone out. Bev?
I was just going to say, would you consider, I know it's just a novel, but The Red Tent, kind of a modern day midrash on this story?
Not kind of. The Red Tent is the definition of a midrash, and it was written in modern day. It absolutely. So if you haven't read it, it's Anita Diamant wrote a book all about Dina, and it is. I have to share. I read it in the week that in the middle of the week of my reading it, I gave birth to Eliana. So I started reading it, I gave birth, and I finished it in the hospital, which was quite emotional, as you can imagine. It's, you know, there are some people, again, when my dad read it, he was incensed. He was like, this is drivel and garbage and ridiculous. I mean, it is not according to, you know, it is not according to the rabbinic midrashim at all. It's very interesting, you know, the possibility that it happened that way is zero. She gives Dina a whole lot more power than Dina probably ever had. Right. But it's a beautiful story. I mean, it's tragic, you know, it's hard. It's really hard. Okay. It is really bloody, and you shouldn't read it when you're about to give birth. But I think in this room, nobody's pregnant. So, you know.
I hope not.
Yeah. But yeah, absolutely. All right. Next week, just to let you know what's happening, what's coming. I don't know how we're going to do this so quickly. I might actually have to skip some of these. Next week, I would love to do Tamar and Yiftach's daughter. I have to tell you that each one of these classes could be the nugget that is the beginning of, like, if not a doctoral dissertation, a master's thesis. Like, you could easily write a master's thesis on each one of these, and you could look at all of these for a doctoral dissertation easily, right? I haven't done that yet, but maybe someday I will. My friends, I gotta say goodbye. Thank you so much for being here with me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for letting me be here with you.